My name's Jake, I'm 29, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the other son. Not the failure, exactly, just the one nobody ever really noticed. My brother, Evan, on the other hand, he was the golden child since the day he was born. You know, that kid who never hears no, whose smallest achievements get framed and hung in the hallway like sacred relics? That was Evan. Meanwhile, I was lucky if anyone remembered my birthday without a Facebook reminder. The difference between us started early. When Evan turned 16, my parents surprised him with a brand new car, a sleek silver Honda Civic, wrapped in a big red bow in the driveway. I still remember Mom crying happy tears while Dad recorded the whole thing on his phone, saying, "Our little man's growing up." 2 years later, I turned 16 too. No bow, no car, just a pat on the shoulder and a sarcastic, "You can use your brother's if he doesn't need it." Spoiler, he always needed it. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I figured life would even out somehow. I got decent grades, worked part-time at a grocery store, and tried not to let resentment eat me alive. But it's hard to ignore the obvious when every holiday turns into an Evan showcase. Thanksgiving dinner? My mom bragged about his grades at Yale. Christmas? She'd hand him a stack of expensive gifts while I got socks and a card that said, "We're proud of you too." Too, as if it were an afterthought. Evan was smooth, charming, confident, everything I wasn't allowed to be. Even when he did something wrong, my parents spun it into a life lesson for me. Like when he borrowed $2,000 from Dad's account during college for what turned out to be a Cancun trip with his friends. Mom laughed it off. "He's just young. Let him live a little." When I once asked for $200 to fix my old laptop so I could finish a project for my side business idea, Dad snapped, "Learn responsibility first, Jake." That phrase became the family motto. Learn responsibility first. I heard it every time I asked for help. Tuition? Learn responsibility. Car repairs? Learn responsibility. Health insurance? Learn responsibility. I learned it. All right. I learned to stop expecting anything from them. After high school, I couldn't afford college, so I went straight to work. I started at a small construction company as an apprentice, picking up whatever shifts I could. I worked long hours, weekends, holidays, you name it, just to keep up with rent. Meanwhile, Evan went to Yale on my parents' dime, then got his rent covered in Boston to give him time to find the right opportunity. The irony? His opportunities always seemed to involve unpaid internships at startups that mysteriously folded 6 months in. But every time he came home, my parents treated him like royalty. Evan's networking, Mom would beam. That's how people get ahead. When I mentioned that I was saving up to maybe start my own business one day, she smiled politely, then asked Evan how his real career was coming along. I don't think I truly started resenting him until my mid-20s, when my hard work finally began to pay off, and nobody cared. By then, I had moved out, bought a small fixer-upper house in a not-so-great neighborhood, and started a construction company of my own. It wasn't glamorous, but I was proud of it. I didn't tell my parents much about it because, honestly, I didn't want their fake approval. But when Evan called me one night asking if I could help him out with a small loan, and then casually dropped that he'd crashed his second car, something inside me snapped. He said, "You've got your little company now, right? You can afford it." Little. The word stung more than it should have. I told him no, and he laughed like I'd made a joke. "You always were stingy," he said. "No wonder you're still where you are." Where I was. I had a business, a house, no debt. But to him, none of that mattered because I didn't have the status. I wish I could say I let it go, but resentment builds quietly, like rust under paint. Every family dinner just added another layer. My parents' house was basically a shrine to Evan. His diplomas, his framed photos with people I didn't recognize, his awards from networking events that didn't even sound real. There wasn't a single picture of me past age 12. Once, I asked Mom why. She looked genuinely confused and said, "Well, Evan always sends us new ones. You never do." I stopped going to dinners after that. For a while, at least. But this past Christmas, I got a call from Mom saying, "Jake, it would mean a lot if you came this year. We're all going to be together again." I almost declined, but something in her voice, that forced cheerfulness, made me curious. Maybe part of me wanted to see if anything had changed. Maybe I wanted to show them that I wasn't the same broke kid they ignored. I had a decent suit now. I drove a truck I paid off in full. I even had employees who respected me. So I went. When I walked into the house, it felt like stepping into a time capsule of everything I'd escaped. Same beige walls, same family photos, all of Evan. He was already there, of course, standing by the fireplace in a tailored jacket, holding a glass of wine like he was posing for a magazine cover. Mom rushed over to hug me, but it felt forced, the kind of hug people give out of obligation, not affection. Dad gave me a nod from the couch without standing up. Jake, Evan grinned. Didn't think you'd make it, man. Busy building birdhouses. I laughed once sharply. No, actual houses, Evan. You know, the ones people live in. He chuckled and raised his glass. Good for you. Some people are just built for business, huh? Mom shot me a look, silently begging me not to start anything. I didn't. Not yet. Dinner was exactly what I expected. Evan dominated every conversation. Mom and Dad fed him question after question like he was some celebrity guest. How's the startup coming? Have you talked to that investor friend again? You're really doing so well, honey. Meanwhile, I got the usual scraps, still doing that construction thing? That construction thing is a company, I said calmly. We're actually expanding. Oh, that's nice. Mom replied with the tone people use when they're only half listening. Halfway through dinner, Evan smirked across the table and said, You know, Jake, I've always admired your persistence. Not everyone can keep grinding away without seeing results. Mom laughed like it was charming banter. Dad even smiled. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I stayed quiet. Evan leaned back, swirling his wine. Some people just aren't built for success. Nothing wrong with that, though. Every family needs balance. The table went silent for a second. I looked at him, then at my parents, waiting for one of them to say something, anything. They didn't. That was the moment I knew I'd made the right decision bringing the envelope with me. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. My mom looked surprised. Who could that be? I set down my fork and said quietly, That's for me. Evan frowned. For you. The front door opened, and a man in a dark coat stepped inside. Mr. Lawson? He said, scanning the room. My dad looked confused. That's me. The man shook his head. Actually, I'm here for Jake Lawson. Every eye turned to me. I stood up slowly, heart pounding, and said, Go ahead. He opened a folder and began reading. The first line made my mom drop her fork. Evan's face went pale, and that's where everything changed. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Evan's smirk faded into something closer to disbelief, and my dad's brow furrowed like he was trying to make sense of what he just heard. My lawyer, Mr. Hartman, stood there patiently, calm and polite, the perfect professional. He didn't seem fazed by the stunned silence in the room. Mom blinked rapidly, then forced a shaky smile. Jake, what is this about? Some kind of prank? I didn't answer. I just gestured toward Mr. Hartman. He cleared his throat. As I stated, effective immediately, all ownership and controlling interest in Lawson & Company. Properties have been transferred to Mr. Jake Lawson. This includes the rental units, the family vacation home, and the associated investment accounts. Dad sat forward. That's impossible. Lawson & Company is mine. I built that company. Mr. Hartman nodded. You did, sir. Until you sold it, 18 months ago. Mr. Lawson acquired full rights through a holding agreement. I watched the color drain from my father's face. He turned toward me, jaw tight. What kind of nonsense is this? Evan laughed, though it sounded nervous. Come on, Jake. You're joking, right? You don't even know how that stuff works. I met his eyes. You'd be surprised what I've learned while grinding away without results. The air turned thick. My mother's voice trembled when she said, Jake, why would you do something like this? I didn't answer her question. Not yet. See, that moment. The shock, the disbelief, it was years in the making. Every condescending comment, every family dinner where they talked over me, every time they made me feel small while lifting Evan higher. It all led to that single pause between their confusion and realization. But this wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was just the crack in the surface. Let me back up a little, because the truth didn't start that night. It started months before, around the time Dad began having money troubles. He'd called me one evening, out of the blue. That was rare. Usually, we spoke through Mom, if at all. He said, Jake, I need your help. Nothing big, just some quick advice. You've been doing construction and rentals, right? I remember sitting at my desk, half suspicious, half curious. Yeah, I said cautiously. What's going on? He sighed like it physically hurt him to ask. Your old man's having some cash flow issues. The tenants in one of my buildings are behind on rent. I'm considering selling the property, but I don't want to deal with agents. I just need a clean deal, fast. You know anyone who'd buy it? I did. Me. But I didn't tell him that yet. Instead, I asked, how much are you looking for? He gave me a number that made my heart race. It was way below market value. I knew that building, solid structure, great location, a little outdated but easily fixable. He wanted quick cash, not long-term value. I might know someone, I said carefully. He chuckled. That's my boy. Always finding opportunity. For once, he sounded proud. Or at least like he needed me. And that was enough motivation for me to play along. Within 2 weeks, I had a holding company set up under a generic name, Alderbrook Ventures. My lawyer handled everything. The sale went through smoothly. My dad never bothered to check who owned Alderbrook. Why would he? To him, I was the kid who built birdhouses. After that first sale, I expected him to learn from it, to get cautious. He didn't. Over the next 6 months, he sold 3 more properties through quick deals, thinking he was liquidating before things got worse. Each time, he dealt with my company without realizing it was me behind it. By the end, I controlled more than half of Lawson and Company's holdings. But I didn't just want control, I wanted clarity. I wanted to know why I had always been treated like an afterthought. That clarity came one evening in June, when I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. Mom was in the kitchen, talking to a friend on speakerphone. She didn't hear me come in. Her friend asked, "So how's Jake doing these days?" Mom laughed. "Jake? Oh, he's fine, I think. Still doing his little business thing. But honestly, Evan's the one we're focused on. He's destined for something big. Jake's, well, he's Jake. Simple boy, hardworking, but not the ambitious type." Something about the way she said simple boy stuck with me. Like I was a pet who learned a few tricks, but would never be allowed inside the house. After that, I stopped trying to fix things. I started building something of my own instead, not just financially, but emotionally. I began documenting every transaction, every transfer, every time Dad signed his name on something without reading the fine print. My lawyer made sure it was airtight. Meanwhile, Evan kept living the good life. My parents funded his downtown apartment, his vacations, even his business launches that somehow never launched. One night, he called me just to brag. "Dude," he said, laughing, "Dad's helping me start another company. You should invest. Maybe you'll finally be part of something big." "I'll pass," I said. He smirked audibly through the phone. "Of course. Still scared of taking risks, huh?" Funny thing is, by then, I was taking the biggest risk of my life, and he had no idea. Months later, Dad asked me for help again. "Just one more property," he said. "Then we'll be fine." I agreed, but only if he signed a partnership clause, something that would simplify the transfer, according to my lawyer. He didn't read it. He just signed. That clause gave me 51% ownership of Lawson and Company. When the ink dried, I knew what I had and what it meant. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I waited. Then Christmas came. The entire drive to my parents' house. I rehearsed what I'd say if things went south. But the truth is, I didn't expect to feel anything when the moment came. I thought I'd just watch them react, detached, satisfied. Instead, when I saw the panic flash in my dad's eyes and the confusion in Mom's, I felt something deeper, sadness, mixed with relief. Back at the table, Mom's voice cut through the silence. "Jake, I don't understand. Why would you take over your father's business behind his back?" I kept my tone calm. "You mean the business that you sold to my company? Legally? Multiple times." Dad's face turned red. "You tricked me. I offered fair deals," I said. "You didn't read them. You just assumed no one like me could afford them." Evan slammed his hand on the table. "You can't do this, Jake. You're ruining the family." I turned to him, meeting his furious glare. "You mean the same family that forgot I existed until tonight?" He stood up, pointing at me like he was the victim. "You're jealous. You've always been jealous because Mom and Dad believed in me." Mom tried to calm him down, but he kept going. "You think buying a few buildings makes you better than me? You'll mess it all up. You always do." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something. He wasn't angry because I'd outsmarted them. He was terrified because, for the first time, the spotlight wasn't his. Dad rose slowly from his chair. His voice was low, shaky but firm. "You're not welcome here if you're going to pull stunts like this. I don't care what the papers say. This family doesn't revolve around greed. The irony nearly made me laugh. Greed? I asked. You sold pieces of your company like they were garage sale junk. I gave you fair market value every time. Mom's eyes welled up with tears. We're family, Jake. You could have just talked to us. I sighed. I tried, Mom. For years. You didn't listen. You never did. Evan leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. You think you've won something here? This isn't success, Jake. It's pathetic. I didn't reply. I just nodded to Mr. Hartman. He placed a sealed envelope on the table. This, he said, details the updated ownership structure. Mr. Lawson's name has been removed from all primary accounts. Going forward, any legal or financial correspondence will go directly to Mr. Jake Lawson. Dad's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. Mom whispered, Jake, please. But I didn't stay to hear the rest. I just walked to the door, paused for a moment, and said quietly, Merry Christmas. The drive home was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. People like my father and brother don't just accept defeat. They regroup. They scheme. And I could already tell, the real storm hadn't even started yet. The next morning, I woke up to 27 missed calls, most from Mom, a few from Dad, and one from an unknown number I recognized immediately, Evans. I didn't answer any of them. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I knew whatever they had to say wouldn't be an apology. It would be outrage wrapped in self-pity. Still, part of me couldn't help but listen when the voicemail notifications started stacking up. Mom's voice came first, trembling. Jake, please call us back. We need to talk about this. Your father's very upset. I don't understand what you've done, but we can fix this together, okay? Then Dad's. His tone was sharp and controlled, the way it always got when he was trying not to yell. You have no idea what you've started, son. You think you're clever? You think this makes you powerful? You just buried this family. Call me back before you regret it. Then came Evan's message, shorter, colder. You don't deserve what you took. You stole it, Jake. I'm going to make sure you lose everything. I replayed that last one twice. The venom in his voice wasn't anger. It was panic. He'd lived his entire life believing he was untouchable. And now, for once, that wasn't true. I deleted the messages and got dressed for work. My crew was meeting at one of our new renovation sites, a small apartment building that, ironically enough, used to belong to my father. As I walked through the dusty hallways checking progress, I couldn't help but think about how different my life had become in just 24 hours. For years, I'd been the outsider looking in. Now I was the one holding the keys. But I should have known the peace wouldn't last. By the end of the week, I got my first taste of what they were planning. My accountant called me, sounding uneasy. Jake, did you authorize a funds transfer from the primary Lawson and Company business account this morning? My stomach dropped. No. How much? $50,000, he said. It's already gone. The authorization came from the old signatory access. Technically, your father's credentials were never revoked by the bank yet. We're working on freezing it now. I gripped the phone tighter. Do you know where it went? He hesitated. An account under Evan Lawson's name. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just stared at the blueprints on my desk, feeling the heat rise behind my eyes. That was it, the confirmation. They weren't just angry. They were retaliating. I called my lawyer immediately. He was calm, as always. We'll handle it, he said. You have full ownership on record. They've just incriminated themselves. But I wasn't thinking about court cases or legal strategy. I was thinking about the look on my dad's face when I left that dinner, the quiet rage, the disbelief. I knew that expression. It wasn't the face of a man who accepted loss. It was the face of someone who'd do anything to get back what he thought was rightfully his. The next few days were tense. I didn't hear from them directly, but the silence felt louder than shouting. Then, one afternoon, I came home to find an envelope taped to my door. No return address, just my name in my father's handwriting. Inside was a single page. It read, You may have the paperwork, but this family will never stand behind you. Enjoy your victory, because soon you'll understand what it costs to betray your own blood. No signature, no explanation, just that. I stood there for a long time, staring at the note, wondering how far he'd go. I wasn't scared, exactly, just disappointed. For all his arrogance, I'd still hoped he'd have enough pride to face me like a man, not resort to childish threats. But the real betrayal came the following week. I had a meeting scheduled with a group of investors who were interested in expanding my company's renovation arm. It was the kind of deal that could change everything. Give me enough capital to move beyond small projects and start developing properties from the ground up. We'd spent months negotiating terms. Everything was lined up. The morning of the meeting, I walked into the conference room feeling confident, until I saw the looks on their faces. The smiles were gone. The atmosphere was heavy, awkward. "Jake," one of them said carefully, "before we begin, we received some concerning information." My stomach tightened. "About what?" He slid a printed document across the table. "About your company's finances." I picked it up, and my heart sank. It was an anonymous report claiming that my business was involved in fraudulent property transfers and money laundering, with supporting evidence that I'd forged signatures to acquire real estate. All fake, of course, but convincing. I flipped through the pages, scanning the details. They'd even attached copies of legitimate sale contracts, real ones my father had signed, but doctored the metadata to make it look like I'd manipulated them. "This isn't real," I said, trying to stay calm. "It's fabricated. Someone's trying to sabotage me." The investors exchanged looks. "We're not saying we believe it, but until this is cleared up, we'll have to postpone." Postpone, the polite word for walk away. When I got back to my truck, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from fury. There was only one person who had access to those documents: my father. He still had old copies of every sale agreement from before the transfer. He must have leaked them, twisting the story to make me look like the villain. That night, I called him. He picked up after 2 rings. "Jake," he said flatly, "I was wondering when you'd call. You sent that report, didn't you?" I said. He didn't deny it. "Actions have consequences. You embarrassed this family. You turned us into a circus. People are asking questions. You ruined my reputation," I said quietly. "No," he replied, almost smug. "You did that when you decided to take what wasn't yours. I'm just making sure people know the truth." I laughed bitterly. "The truth? You mean your version of it?" There was a long pause before he said, "You can still fix this, Jake. Transfer the company back. Sign it over to me, and we'll forget the rest. I'll even let you manage one of the smaller divisions." "That's a fair offer." "Fair," I repeated, stunned. "You stole from me, slandered me, and you're still pretending you're in control." He sighed, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "You're too emotional to understand how business works. You're not built for this, son. You never were." That line, "You're not built for this," it was the same thing Evan had said at dinner. The same condescension that had defined my entire life. Something in me hardened then. "I'll see you in court," I said, and hung up. But that was before I realized court wasn't even their endgame. A few days later, I found out Evan had gone further. Much further. One of my employees, Marcus, a reliable guy I'd worked with for years, came into my office, looking uneasy. "Hey boss," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "I don't know how to say this, but someone's been calling around asking about you. Clients, vendors, even the guys at the hardware store." "Who?" I asked. He hesitated. "Your brother, Evan, said he's working with an investigative firm, looking into your company's practices." My jaw clenched. "Did he threaten anyone?" "No, just dropped your name and made it sound like you're being investigated." Now people are talking. Rumors spread fast in a small town. Within 48 hours, suppliers were hesitating to deliver materials. 2 clients paused their contracts. My phone stopped ringing as often. I tried to stay composed, but the frustration ate at me. I'd worked for everything I had, every inch of it, and now my own family was trying to burn it down because they couldn't stand that I'd finally built something of my own. The final blow came when I checked my business account balance and found it almost empty. Not zero, but close. I called my bank in disbelief, only to find out that my company credit line had been flagged for investigation after a complaint was filed by, you guessed it, my father's old accountant. Someone had accused me of fraudulent activity using those same falsified documents. The bank froze my line until it could be resolved. Overnight, my liquidity vanished. I sat at my desk late into the night, the lights off, the silence heavy. I wasn't angry anymore. I was cold, numb. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was war. I looked around my office, at the framed photo of my first work crew, at the architectural sketches pinned to the wall. Everything I had built was now hanging by a thread because the people who were supposed to care about me decided I didn't deserve success. That's when I realized something. They hadn't betrayed me for what I did. They betrayed me because I stopped needing them. And in their world, independence was the ultimate insult. As I sat there, staring at the frozen accounts on my laptop screen, a thought began to take shape, slow, deliberate, and razor sharp. If they wanted to play dirty, fine. But they forgot one thing. Every document they used against me, every sale, every clause, every signature, I still had the originals. And the next move would be mine. For the next few weeks, it felt like everything I'd built was slipping through my fingers. Every morning started with another problem, another call, another urgent email that seemed to push me closer to the edge. My company wasn't bankrupt, not yet, but it was bleeding. Slowly, quietly. The first major hit came when the city inspector failed one of our permits. He claimed a missing signature on a compliance form, even though I'd personally submitted it months ago. When I checked, the file had mysteriously vanished from the online portal. I called the clerk I knew and asked if anything strange had happened. She lowered her voice and said, "You didn't hear it from me, Jake, but someone's been asking questions about your projects, someone connected to your father's business." That night, I sat alone in my office long after everyone else had gone home. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I flipped through files, receipts, and invoices, trying to find a pattern. It was all too coordinated. The missing permit, the frozen funds, the rumors. Someone was trying to choke my company from every angle. I knew who. The worst part was watching my employees start to notice. They didn't complain, but I saw the looks, the silent worry in their eyes every time I said, "We'll figure it out." I'd always prided myself on being the kind of boss who didn't let his people feel the weight of his problems, but it was getting harder to hide. I remember one afternoon in particular. It was raining hard, and the roof at one of our renovation sites had started leaking. Half the crew was outside in ponchos, trying to cover the exposed beams with tarps before the water ruined the drywall. I was out there with them, soaked to the bone, hammering nails into a temporary brace when Marcus approached me. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the rain with that uneasy look again. Finally, he said, "Boss, if you need to cut hours for a while, we'll understand." I looked at him, confused. Why would I cut hours? He shrugged. "People talk. They say business is slowing down. Some of the guys are nervous, that's all." I forced a smile. "We'll be fine. Just rumors." He nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe me. That night, I went home drenched, exhausted, and silent. My small house felt emptier than usual, the kind of quiet that presses against you. I sat on the couch with the TV off and stared at nothing. I'd never felt so tired, not physically, but deep in my bones. I kept thinking about all the years I'd spent trying to prove I was worth something to people who'd already made up their minds about me. My parents, my brother, they'd built a family narrative where I was the average one. The backup plan, the safety net. And now that I'd outgrown that role, they were punishing me for it. For a while, I almost gave up. I won't lie about that. There were nights when I stared at my company's ledger, realizing that one more frozen payment or canceled contract could sink everything. I thought about selling a few properties just to stay afloat. I even drafted an email to one of my old clients asking if he'd buy out a building I'd renovated, but I never sent it. Something inside me refused to let go that easily. Then came the day I hit what I can only call rock bottom. It was a Thursday. I remember because the sky was gray, the kind of colorless morning that makes time feel slower. I was in the middle of a site inspection when my phone buzzed, a message from my bank. "Notice, your personal checking account has been temporarily restricted pending review." My breath caught. I called them immediately. After 15 minutes of being transferred between departments, someone finally explained the issue. A complaint had been filed against me, alleging illicit business activity and misuse of company funds for personal gain. It was all fabricated, of course, but until the matter was reviewed, I couldn't touch a cent of my money. That was the moment it hit me. They weren't just attacking my business anymore. They were coming after me. Personally. The same day, I got a letter from my father's attorney, a cease and desist order claiming I'd illegally coerced him into signing over company assets. It was nonsense, but legal nonsense still costs money to fight, and I didn't have much of that left. By that weekend, I was down to less than $2,000 in liquid cash. I canceled every non-essential expense. I told my team to take a temporary break, unpaid, of course, though I promised I'd call them back as soon as I could. I didn't tell them that I wasn't sure I ever would. For the first time in years, I had nothing to wake up early for. No projects, no clients, no sense of direction. I spent that week cleaning my garage, not because it needed it, but because I didn't know what else to do. Every rusted tool, every bucket of nails, every blueprint scattered across the workbench felt like a reminder of what I'd built and what I was losing. That's when I found the old photo. It was tucked between two folders in a drawer, a picture of me and Evan as kids. We were maybe 10 and 12. He had his arm around me, smiling, the way brothers are supposed to. On the back, Mom had written, "My boys, partners forever." I stared at that caption for a long time. Partners forever. The irony almost made me laugh. But beneath the bitterness, something inside me shifted. I realized I'd been fighting this war on their terms, reacting to every move, trying to prove myself to people who didn't care. That had to stop. So, I decided to disappear. Not run away, exactly. Just step back, quietly, strategically. The next morning, I packed a bag, loaded my truck, and drove 3 hours north to a small cabin I'd bought years ago, one of the first properties I ever renovated. It wasn't fancy, but it had heat, water, and most importantly, peace. For the first few days, I did nothing. I sat on the porch with coffee and listened to the wind cut through the trees. The world felt still again, like it was waiting for me to breathe. But peace doesn't mean surrender. It just means silence before the next step. And in that silence, I started thinking. I replayed every conversation, every document, every deal my father had made. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something didn't add up. He couldn't have pulled off that coordinated sabotage alone. He didn't have the technical knowledge, not about banking, not about metadata manipulation, not about digital forensics. But Evan did. He'd majored in computer science before dropping out of Yale. He used to brag about being able to trace anything. It hit me like a punch. Evan wasn't just helping Dad. He was running the operation. That realization lit a spark I hadn't felt in months. I spent the next few nights going through my old files, looking for anything that could connect them. That's when I noticed it, small inconsistencies in the digital timestamps of the fraudulent documents they'd used against me. The metadata showed they'd been edited on Evan's laptop. I couldn't prove it yet, but I could trace it. I called Mr. Hartman, my lawyer, and told him everything. He didn't sound surprised. "Jake," he said, "I've been reviewing the digital signatures on your father's files. Whoever altered them didn't just make mistakes, they left fingerprints. We can follow the trail." It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first glimpse of a way out. Still, progress was slow. My accounts were frozen, my business stalled, and I was living off canned soup and black coffee. Some nights, I'd lie awake listening to the rain hit the roof and wonder if it was worth it. If proving myself to people who'd already written me off was worth the sleepless nights, the debt, the stress. But then I'd think about all the times they'd told me I wasn't built for success. How my dad had laughed when I said I wanted to start my own company. How my mom had said, "Maybe one day you'll be like your brother." No, I wasn't giving them that satisfaction. So I kept going. I called in favors quietly. People I'd helped over the years, landlords, contractors, even a few city clerks who owed me a debt of gratitude. I didn't tell them details, just that I needed information. Slowly, pieces started to come together. By the end of that month, I had enough evidence to see the outline of what they'd done and how I could use it. The trick was patience. I couldn't strike back yet, not until everything was airtight. In the meantime, I stayed quiet. To the world, it probably looked like I'd disappeared, the failure, brother retreating into obscurity. My father likely gloated about it. Evan probably celebrated. But behind that silence, I was building something else, something stronger, cleaner, and far more dangerous than they expected. Because if they'd taught me anything over the years, it was how to survive when no one believed in me. And this time, when I came back, I wasn't coming for approval. I was coming for everything they thought they could take. The cabin became my war room. Days blurred into nights as I pored over every file, email, and transaction record I could recover from my drives. The air smelled like coffee, pine, and printer ink. A small space heater hummed beside my desk while I sat hunched over my laptop, tracing lines between names and dates like connecting veins on a map. I didn't have money, not really. Most of my accounts were still under review. But what I did have was time and leverage. And for the first time in months, I wasn't fighting just to survive. I was strategizing to win. Mr. Hartman had been digging too. Every few days, He'd call with updates in that measured voice of his. "We're getting closer, Jake," he'd say. "Your father and brother left a paper trail so obvious it's almost insulting." He was right. The deeper we looked, the clearer it became. Evan had used his tech background to doctor the documents, and he'd been sloppy about it. His digital fingerprints were everywhere. Worse for him, he'd also used company funds to cover his tracks, transferring small amounts from Lawson and company accounts into his own under consulting fees. All of it was recorded, and all of it illegal. When I saw the transaction history for the first time, I remember whispering, "You did this to yourself, Evan." Hartman and I built the case piece by piece. We didn't tell anyone. No threats, no warnings. I wanted silence. Let them think I was broken, gone, irrelevant. Let them gloat at family dinners about how Jake couldn't handle the pressure. In the meantime, I got creative. Since I couldn't access my main accounts, I started working under the radar. Remember those old renovation clients I'd helped years ago? The ones who'd said, "If you ever need anything, call me." I called. A few small private investors agreed to back me quietly, no paperwork linking my name to any of it yet. Together, we started a new company, a fresh brand under a different name, Harborstone Development. It was small at first, just 3 guys, 2 trucks, and a rented workspace in an industrial zone. No big signs, no public presence. We built quietly, under their radar. Our first project was an abandoned farmhouse I'd purchased before everything fell apart. We fixed it up, flipped it, and doubled our investment in 2 months. Then came a commercial property in need of renovation. Then a block of apartments. Slowly, quietly, I started regaining what I'd lost, except this time, it wasn't built on approval or permission. It was mine alone. The process was exhausting, but different. When I'd first started my business years ago, I'd been driven by anger, the need to prove to my parents I wasn't a failure. Now, I was driven by precision. Every move I made had a purpose. Every signature was calculated. Every deal was sealed twice over. While I rebuilt, Hartman finalized the case. By the end of spring, we had enough evidence to bury both Evan and my father legally. But I wasn't ready to strike, not yet. I wanted to make sure when the truth came out, there'd be no doubt about who had built everything and who had destroyed it. Then something unexpected happened. One evening, as I was reviewing blueprints in the cabin, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. I hadn't heard from him in months. "Hey, boss," he said, sounding cautious. "Didn't think you'd pick up." "Marcus," I said, smiling faintly. "You still call me boss?" He chuckled. "Old habits. Listen, we've been hearing things. People saying you're making a comeback. That true?" I paused. "Depends who's asking." He laughed. "Just some of the guys. We've been doing small gigs, but honestly, it's not the same without you. You thinking about bringing the crew back?" That question, so simple, hit harder than I expected. These were the guys who'd stuck with me through the worst of it, who'd watched me go from a small-time builder to owning a company, only to see it fall apart because of family politics. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think it's time." That weekend, they came up to the cabin, Marcus, Luis, and Tommy. We grilled burgers outside on the old fire pit and talked about plans. It felt like family, a word that suddenly didn't sting anymore. By summer, Harborstone was fully operational. We had 10 employees, 3 active projects, and more offers coming in than we could handle. Investors were starting to notice. Word of mouth travels fast in the construction world. People love a comeback story, especially one with a villain attached. Everyone had heard some version of what happened, how Jake Lawson got messed over by his old man. The rumors had twisted into something almost mythic. I didn't correct them. The truth would come out soon enough. Meanwhile, my father's company was starting to crumble. Their reputation was in shambles. The false allegations against me had backfired when inconsistencies surfaced in their filings. Clients began pulling out. I didn't have to lift a finger. They were undoing themselves. One afternoon, I got an email from an old tenant who used to rent one of the Lawson and Company properties. She wrote, "They've stopped maintaining the building. The management won't answer calls. Everyone says the company's going under." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the message. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt quiet. That was the strangest part of success this time. It wasn't loud. It wasn't about revenge or gloating. It was steady, grounded. I didn't need them to know how well I was doing. But I knew that one day they would. Because the truth always finds its way home. That day came sooner than expected. In July, I got a call from a real estate broker who'd worked with my father for years. His tone was nervous. "Jake," he said, "I don't want to overstep, but your dad's company is listing some of their holdings. Quietly. They're desperate to sell. Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I know what happened. And because I think you'll want to see the list." He sent it over. I opened the file and froze. One of the properties was the old Lawson headquarters. The building my father had built from the ground up 20 years ago. The same one where he used to bring us as kids and say, "One day, this will all be yours, Evan." I stared at the listing for a long time. The asking price was low, lower than I'd expected. Almost insultingly low. They were desperate for liquidity. That night, I called Hartman. "Buy it," I said, quietly, through Harborstone. He didn't question it. Understood. 2 weeks later, it was mine. When I walked into that building again, I swear it didn't feel real. The same marble floors, the same glass conference room, the same framed mission statement that used to hang behind Dad's desk. Family first. Always. I laughed when I saw it. A dry, tired laugh that echoed through the empty halls. The receptionist's desk was still there, dusty and abandoned. I ran my hand along the counter and thought about all the times I'd walked in here as a kid, watching my dad shake hands with clients, smiling like he owned the world. And now, that world belonged to me. But I didn't make any announcements. No press releases. No public statements. I just cleaned the building, renovated it, and hung a new sign above the entrance. Harborstone headquarters. I didn't need to brag. The sign did that for me. By the end of that summer, I was back on top. Our company was turning profits that rivaled Lawson and Company in its best years. And thanks to Hartman, we were preparing the final legal blow, the full evidence package linking Evan to the forged documents, embezzlement, and falsified reports. The day before we filed the case, I got another call from Mom. Her voice was small, uncertain. "Jake," she said softly, "we need to talk." I hadn't heard her sound like that in years. I hesitated, then said, "About what?" "Your father's not well. Things have been hard. Maybe we could meet. Just talk." I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long enough for her to add, "We miss you." That line hit like a knife. Not because I believed it, but because I could hear the guilt underneath. I agreed to meet. Not because I wanted closure, but because I wanted to look them in the eye one more time before everything changed. As I hung up, Hartman's words echoed in my mind. "You realize, once we file this, there's no going back." I looked around my office. The polished wood desk, the framed company logo, the sunlight filtering through the windows. "I know," I said quietly. "That's the point." And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being summoned to their world. They were coming into mine. The meeting was set for a Friday evening. Fitting. The same day of the week we used to have family dinners, back when everything looked normal from the outside. Mom suggested we meet at their house. I declined and offered my office instead, the new one. The one that used to be my father's headquarters. When she hesitated, I said calmly, "If you want to talk, that's where I'll be." I arrived early that day, an hour before they were supposed to show up. The building was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. The sun was setting behind the glass walls, casting long golden streaks across the conference table. I straightened my tie, poured a glass of water, and waited. At exactly 6 o'clock, I heard footsteps echo down the hall. Mom entered first, wearing that same polite smile she always used when she was about to say something manipulative but wanted to sound gentle. Behind her came my father, slower, older, angrier. Evan followed last, dressed in a sharp suit that looked one size too smug. "Jake," Mom said, her voice soft. "This place looks different." "It should," I said. "It's under new management." My father's eyes darted to the walls. The Harborstone sign was impossible to miss. He clenched his jaw but said nothing. We sat. The silence was thick. Finally, Mom broke it. "We didn't come here to fight. We just want to understand what you're trying to do." "What I'm trying to do," I said, "is protect what's mine. What you tried to take." Dad leaned forward. "You think you're protecting something? You're destroying the family name. Everything I built. You built it by selling pieces of it behind my back." I cut in. "And when you realized I was the one buying, you tried to ruin me. You and your prodigy." Evan smirked. "You act like we're villains in some movie. You tricked Dad into signing over his company, Jake. Don't play the victim." "I didn't trick him. I made fair deals. He just never believed I could." He leaned back, That same dismissive smirk he'd worn his whole life. So what now? You got your little empire. You want us to bow down? Ask for forgiveness? I shook my head. No, Evan. I want you to listen for once. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder, thick, neatly bound, with a single word written on the cover, Discovery. Hartman had told me, if you want maximum impact, let them see it with their own eyes. I slid it across the table. Dad frowned. What's this? Proof, I said. Bank records, emails, transaction logs, everything you and your son used to sabotage my business. He hesitated before opening it. Evan's confidence cracked the moment his eyes hit the first page. Mom's voice trembled. Jake, what is this supposed to? Look closer, I said. Every false report, every doctored document, every digital signature you used against me traces back to one device, Evan's laptop. Evan's hand twitched as he turned the pages. His name was everywhere. His accounts, his timestamps, his emails to Dad, discussing damage control. You can't prove I sent those, he said quickly. This could have been faked. I smiled slightly. Already verified by a digital forensics team. You'd be surprised what metadata holds, little brother. Dad's voice was low, almost a growl. You went through all this trouble just to humiliate us. No, I said evenly. To make it official. I handed him another paper, a letter stamped with a court seal. Dad read the first line and froze. You're pressing charges? Not yet, I said. That depends on you. Evan slammed the folder shut. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? You framed me for fraud. You cost my company everything. I rebuilt from nothing while you lived off lies. Mom was crying now. Jake, please. This will ruin your father. He ruined himself. For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall felt louder than breathing. Then I stood, walked to the window, and said quietly, You know what the funny part is? You could have just said sorry. I would have walked away. Dad scoffed. You think we're going to beg? No, I said. I think you're going to listen. I turned back toward them. Here's how this goes. You sign over the remaining Lawson and Company properties, everything still in your name, to Harborstone. You also release a statement clearing my name publicly, acknowledging that the allegations were false. Do that, and this never sees court. Evan laughed. You're blackmailing your own family? I smiled. No, I'm offering you mercy. He stood up suddenly, trying to tower over me. You're bluffing. You don't have the influence to. My office door opened. Mr. Hartman stepped in, calm as ever, holding a leather briefcase. Good evening. I'd advise you to sit down, Mr. Lawson. Evan froze mid-sentence. Hartman placed several neatly labeled folders on the table. Everything your brother just said is supported by evidence. We've already submitted copies to the Federal Business Bureau and the City Prosecutor's Office, sealed, pending Jake's decision. Once they're unsealed, both of you face fraud and defamation charges. Dad's face went white. You can't do this. Hartman looked at me, then back at him. Legally, he already has. Mom buried her face in her hands. Evan just stood there, trembling between anger and panic. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I walked back to the table, picked up the Discovery folder, and tapped the cover gently. This, I said, isn't about revenge anymore. It's about correction. You spent years teaching me I wasn't built for success. Turns out, I was just built differently. Dad finally spoke, his voice hoarse. And if we refuse? I looked him dead in the eye. Then I file everything Monday morning. The press will know. Your partners will know. Every client, whoever trusted you will know exactly what kind of man you are. The room fell silent again. Evan's voice cracked when he finally spoke. You'd destroy your own father for this? I didn't even blink. He tried to destroy his own son first. Mom sobbed quietly. Jake, please, what do you want from us? I told you, I said softly. Accountability. I pushed a pen across the table and watched my father stare at it. His hands shook. Evan whispered something to him. I couldn't hear what, but Dad didn't move. Finally, I added, you have until Sunday night. I turned to leave, Hartman following behind me. Before I reached the door, I stopped and glanced back. You know, I said quietly, I used to wish I could be like you, Dad. Successful, respected. But now, I realize I already surpassed you, because when you lost everything, you blamed others. When I lost everything, I rebuilt. Then I walked out. As the heavy office doors closed behind me, I exhaled for the first time in hours. The tension in my chest began to lift. Hartman gave me a nod. You did well. It's not over, I said. No, he replied, smiling faintly. But you just took the board. That weekend, I didn't hear a word from them. No calls. No messages. I assumed they were scrambling, trying to find leverage, or maybe trying to talk their way out of it. Then, Sunday night, at 10:47 p.m., I got an email. Subject, will sign. Attached were digital copies of every document, transfer papers, signed statements, notarized releases. Everything. For years, they'd made me feel powerless. That night, they gave me everything they'd once said I didn't deserve. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the computer screen, a strange calm washing over me. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like quiet justice. Because for the first time in my life, they didn't get the last word. The Monday morning after that email, the sun rose brighter than it had in months. I woke up before dawn, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat on the porch of my cabin, the same place I'd once felt broken and cornered. This time, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. By noon, the final documents were filed and recorded. Harborstone officially owned every remaining property, account, and asset that once belonged to Lawson & Company. My father's empire, the one he used to brag would stay in the family forever, was now legally, irrevocably mine. That afternoon, the news broke. A press release went public confirming that due to internal misconduct and false allegations, Lawson & Company had been dissolved and merged into Harborstone Development. The statement was signed by both my parents. It was short, formal, and humiliatingly clear. Within hours, phone calls started flooding my office. Reporters, investors, old clients. Some wanted comments, others congratulations. I gave none. My only statement was 5 words. Truth doesn't need explanation anymore. By evening, my father's name was trending locally. The old community that had once admired him now whispered about him with the same pity reserved for fallen kings. Investors pulled out of his side projects, suppliers demanded payments, and his former employees, the ones who'd worshipped him, reached out asking if Harborstone was hiring. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Jake, came the voice, quiet and cracked. It was Dad. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You won. I hope you're proud." I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't about winning, Dad. It was about stopping you from lying. He sighed, long and tired. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said. It makes me free. There was a pause, then a bitter chuckle. You've destroyed everything our name stood for. No, I replied calmly. I just showed people what it really stood for. He didn't answer. I could hear him breathing on the other end. That sharp, shallow sound that used to fill the house right before one of his lectures. Only this time, there was no anger left. Just emptiness. Finally, he said, your mother's not doing well. She can't sleep. She keeps saying we should have done things differently. I didn't say anything. He continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I was supposed to leave something behind. Now I've got nothing. You still have her, I said. That's more than you ever gave me. He started to say something else, then stopped. The line went dead. I sat there for a while, staring at my reflection in the office window. For years, that man's approval had been the thing I chased like air. Now, hearing him defeated didn't bring joy, only closure. A week later, I heard from one of our old neighbors that my parents had put their house up for sale. They're downsizing, she said carefully, trying to start fresh. I didn't ask where they were moving. I didn't need to know. Some endings don't need witnesses. As for Evan, his fall was faster. When the digital forensics report was made public, every business he'd tried to attach himself to dropped him immediately. He'd burned through his inheritance long ago, and the lawsuits that followed drained whatever was left. One night, Marcus forwarded me an article, local tech consultant accused of fraudulent data practices, facing charges pending investigation. I read it once, then closed the tab. No satisfaction, no gloating, just the quiet certainty that the universe has its own way of balancing things. Months passed. Harborstone flourished. We expanded to 3 cities, hired back my old team, and even launched a mentorship program for young builders. I made sure every worker, every intern, got the recognition I never had. On the anniversary of the takeover, I walked through the old Lawson building, now fully renovated, modern, filled with life again. The hallways echoed with laughter, the kind that once never existed here. I stopped by the main conference room, where I'd confronted my family for the last time. The table was new, the walls repainted, but the memory still lingered. I ran my fingers along the glass and whispered to myself, "You finally built something that lasts." Before leaving, I went to the lobby where that old plaque used to hang, "Family First." Always. I had replaced it with a new one. Simple, clean, and honest. It read, "Earned, not given." A few months later, I got one last letter in the mail. Handwritten. From Mom. It said, "We were wrong. About you, about everything. Your father doesn't say it, but he knows it too. I hope one day you'll forgive us. Not for us, but for yourself. Love, Mom." I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. Some things don't need closure. They just need peace. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. I still had long days, new challenges, the weight of leadership. But there was one difference. I finally stopped carrying the ghost of who they told me I was. They'd tried to define me with their approval. Now, I defined myself with my silence. A year later, at the grand opening of our newest project, a housing development built on the same land where my father's first office once stood, I gave a short speech. I looked out at the crowd of workers, clients, and investors. The cameras flashed, the microphones hovered, waiting for some grand statement about victory or revenge. But I just smiled and said, "Sometimes the best way to rebuild your life is to stop asking for permission." The audience applauded, but I barely heard it. I was looking at the horizon, the sun dipping low, painting everything gold, the color of endings that don't hurt anymore. And for the first time in my life, I felt it fully. Not pride, not anger, just peace. Then I walked off the stage, slipped my hands into my pockets, and whispered to myself, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. Some people are born into legacies. Others build them from the ground up.